He didn't look up when the janitor knocked. That was the thing about Clifton Ware. He had a gift for making you feel invisible without ever saying a word. He just didn't look up, and somehow that was enough. The knock had come from Norbert Gaines, who had been cleaning the executive floor of Ware Capital Partners for 11 years, who knew where every outlet was and which fluorescent tube flickered on cold mornings, who had memorized the coffee preferences of every associate on the floor without being asked. Norbert knocked because the door was half open, and he needed to vacuum the corner by the window. Clifton didn't look up because Norbert was in the particular accounting system that men like Clifton kept without knowing they kept it, not worth the interruption. "Go around," Clifton said to his computer screen. Norbert went around. What Clifton Ware did not know in that moment was that the man he had just spoken to like furniture had spent the last 3 months quietly building something in the evenings and on weekends that was about to land on Clifton's desk in the form of a patent application, a functional prototype, and the attention of 2 of the largest logistics firms in the country. He did not know this because he had never once asked Norbert Gaines a single question about his life outside that building. Not one. In 11 years. That detail matters. It matters because of what came next. The logistics industry in 2019 had a problem that everyone in the field understood, and almost no one had solved cleanly. Last-mile delivery in dense urban environments, the final stretch between distribution hub and front door, was hemorrhaging time and money at a rate that the industry's own analysts described, in one widely circulated white paper, as quietly catastrophic. The solutions being tested were expensive, flashy, and mostly theoretical. Drone programs that got tangled in regulations, autonomous vehicle pilots that stalled in weather, app-based routing software that worked perfectly in demos and fell apart in the real world, where streets flooded and elevators broke, and building managers changed the rules without telling anyone. Norbert Gaines had been watching this problem from the inside for 4 years, before he started thinking he might know how to fix part of it. He had grown up in Flatbush, Brooklyn, the kind of neighborhood where you learn to navigate scarcity, not by complaining about it, but by engineering around it. His father had driven a delivery truck for a regional grocery chain for 22 years. His mother had worked the overnight intake desk at a medical supply warehouse in Queens. Norbert had grown up understanding, on a cellular level, how things moved, or more precisely, how they stopped moving, and why, and where the pressure built up when they did. He had a degree in mechanical engineering from CCNY that he had earned at night over 6 years while working days, first at a car wash, then at a printing company, then at a building services firm that placed him with Ware Capital Partners in 2008. He had the degree framed on the wall of his apartment in East New York. Nobody at Ware Capital had ever seen it or asked about it, because the conversation that might have led to that question had never happened. He had started sketching the system on legal pads in 2015. By 2017, it existed in rough form as a software-hardware hybrid, a compact modular dispatch unit that could be mounted in the lobby of any mid-rise building and communicate wirelessly with both incoming delivery vehicles and building residents. Cutting the average failed delivery rate by a figure Norbert had calculated conservatively at 63%. He had tested it in his own building, then in 3 buildings on his block, with the permission of the super, who was his cousin, then in 14 buildings in a radius that he could reach on a Saturday morning. The data was clean. The results held. In the spring of 2019, Norbert filed the patent with a lawyer he had found through a paralegal in his church who had pointed him toward a non-profit IP clinic in Midtown that helped independent inventors navigate the process without paying fees they couldn't afford. The lawyer's name was Gwen Ashford. She was thorough, careful, and had looked at Norbert's documentation with the specific kind of focused attention that people give to things that are genuinely surprising. "This is real," she had said, at their second meeting, not as encouragement but as a statement of professional fact. "I know," Norbert said. He had said it quietly, the way people say things they have been certain of for a long time, and have learned not to announce. The patent was pending. He had begun reaching out, carefully, through Gwen's contacts, to two mid-sized logistics firms that had publicly signaled interest in last-mile innovation. One was based in Atlanta. One was based in Chicago. Both had requested follow-up materials within 2 weeks of Norbert's initial contact. None of this was happening inside the glass towers of Ware Capital Partners. It was happening in the evenings, at a kitchen table in East New York, under a lamp that needed a new bulb, while the city outside the window did what it always did. Norbert pushed the vacuum around the corner of Clifton Ware's office, without any change in his expression, finished the room in 4 minutes, and went on to the next one. It was a Tuesday in October when the call came. Norbert was on the 7th floor, restocking supplies in the utility room, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at it, stepped into the hallway, and stood with his back against the wall for the duration of a 12-minute conversation that he kept very quiet, speaking in the measured, precise way he always spoke when the subject mattered. When he hung up, he stood there for a moment with the phone still in his hand. The hallway was empty. The building breathed around him. The hum of the HVAC, the distant sound of a printer on the floor above. The Atlanta firm had made an offer, not for a partnership, for an acquisition. The number they had said was not a number Norbert had said out loud before, even to himself. He said it once now, under his breath, in that empty hallway, just to hear what it sounded like in his own voice. Then he put the phone in his pocket and went back to finish the utility room, because there were still 2 hours left in his shift. He didn't tell anyone at the building. There was no one to tell in the way he would have needed to tell them. As an equal, as a person with a life that extended past what they could see of him in the corridors. He had colleagues he liked. He had a supervisor named Roy, who was fair-minded and occasionally funny. But there was a distance built into the architecture of the place. A distance that wasn't hostile exactly, just structural, like the difference between the freight elevator and the main one. Norbert had been riding the freight elevator for 11 years. What broke through that distance came from an unexpected direction. Donaldine Marsh worked the afternoon reception desk on the lobby level, a job she had held for 3 years, with the specific combination of warmth and efficiency that made the lobby feel like a place rather than just a threshold. She had a habit of noticing things. Who came in looking tense, who left looking lighter than they arrived, whose lunch was getting cold in the delivery bag by the door. She had noticed, over several months, that Norbert arrived for his shift with a legal pad tucked under his arm, that he sat in the break room with it during the 15 minutes he got at noon, and that whatever was on those pages, it was not a crossword. She had asked him about it once, simply, without preamble. "What is that?" Most people would have deflected. Norbert looked at her for a moment, seemed to decide something, and told her. Not everything, but enough. A system he'd been building. A problem he thought he'd solved. A filing he had made. Donaldine had listened with her full attention. "Does anyone here know about this?" she asked. "No," he said. She nodded, slowly, the way people nod when they are taking in the weight of something. That conversation had happened in February. In October, when the acquisition offer came through and the story quietly began to move, it was Donaldine who handled the logistics of the meeting request. The formal introduction to Ware Capital's in-house counsel that became necessary when it emerged that the firm whose lobby Norbert had been cleaning was itself a minority investor in the Atlanta company that had just offered to acquire his patent. The conflict disclosure took 3 business days to process. During those 3 days, Norbert continued his regular shift without any change in routine. He vacuumed, he restocked, he wiped down the glass panels in the lobby every morning with a squeegee that left no streaks. On the 3rd day, he was asked to come to the 14th floor, not the executive level, the conference room where the in-house legal team worked. He went in his work clothes because he had not been given any indication that he should do otherwise. There were 4 people in the room. Ware Capital's general counsel, a senior associate, a compliance officer, and Clifton Ware, who had arrived 4 minutes late and who sat at the head of the table looking at his phone until his counsel said his name. Clifton looked up. For the first time in 11 years, he actually looked at Norbert Gaines. The thing that happened in that room was not dramatic by the standards of what would come later. No one raised a voice. The lawyers spoke in the measured, qualified language of people being careful. Norbert answered questions directly, with the clarity of a man who had been building toward this moment for 4 years and knew his documentation better than anyone in the room. But somewhere in the second hour, when Norbert had walked through the technical architecture of his system using a printed deck that Gwen had helped him prepare, 43 pages, no unnecessary flourishes, just data and diagrams and results. A silence settled over the room that was different from the silences that had preceded it. Clifton was looking at the deck. He had been looking at it for 3 minutes without speaking. "You built this here," he said finally. Not a question. A statement he was processing as he made it. "Not here," Norbert said. "At home. At night. While working here. Yes." Clifton set the deck down. His expression was doing something that the people who worked for him had rarely seen it do. It was working through something it hadn't been prepared for. Not the patent, not the money, the person. 11 years, he said. 11 years, Norbert confirmed. The room was quiet. The acquisition closed 9 weeks later. The terms were not disclosed publicly, but Gwen Ashford later described the negotiation as one of the more straightforward she had conducted in a decade of IP work. Norbert signed on a Thursday morning in a conference room, 2 blocks from his apartment in East New York, with Gwen on one side of him and his father, who had driven his delivery truck for the last time 2 years earlier, on the other. His father, whose name was Gilbert, did not fully understand the technical dimensions of what had just happened. He understood the number. He sat very straight in his chair and said nothing for a long time after the signing, and then he said quietly, to no one in particular, "There it is." That was all, but the way he said it carried everything. The story moved into public view not through Norbert but around him. Donald Dean had mentioned the situation to a friend who worked in tech journalism, not as a tip, just as a thing she couldn't stop thinking about. Her friend had made 2 calls. One of them had reached a reporter named Cecily Vance, who wrote about labor and innovation for a publication that sat precisely at the intersection of those 2 things, and had been looking for something real to write about for 6 months. Cecily had emailed Norbert through Gwen's office. He had called back within a day. They had spoken for 2 hours on a Saturday, Norbert at his kitchen table, Cecily in her apartment in Harlem with her recorder running, and her notes filling up faster than she expected. She published the piece on a Wednesday morning. By noon, it had been forwarded several thousand times. By Friday, the number had crossed into territory that her editor described as unlike anything the publication had experienced. The comments were something Cecily read carefully, the way she read all feedback, and what struck her was not the volume, but the consistency. People who agreed on almost nothing else were saying the same thing. This is someone who deserved to be seen. This happens everywhere. Every office, every building. How many Norberts are out there right now? The piece had a section, 3 paragraphs near the middle, that described the morning of the conference room meeting, specifically, the moment when Clifton Ware had first really looked, at the man who had cleaned his office for 11 years. Cecily had reconstructed it from 3 separate accounts. It was the most quoted section. "He asked me how long," Norbert had told her. 11 years. And I watched him do the arithmetic, not the math of the acquisition, the other arithmetic. How many times he had walked past me. How many times I had been in that room, and he had talked through me. You could see him adding it up. It wasn't comfortable, but he didn't look away. The piece had been up for 8 days when Clifton Ware requested a meeting with Norbert directly, not through counsel, not through Ware Capital's communications team. He called Gwen's office and asked if Norbert would be willing to meet. He suggested coffee near Norbert's neighborhood. He did not suggest his office. They met at a diner on Linden Boulevard on a Thursday morning, 2 booths from the window. Clifton arrived first, which surprised Beatrice, who had seen enough of the world to understand when a man was trying to make a point by being early. He did not have notes. He did not have a prepared statement. He said that he had been thinking for 8 days straight about the arithmetic, about what 11 years of invisibility costs a person, and about how the cost is never only material. He said that what Norbert had built was extraordinary, but that the thing that had kept him up at night was simpler than that. It was the question of how a man with that mind, that discipline, that particular quality of attention, had been allowed to remain invisible in a building full of people who prided themselves on identifying extraordinary things. The answer, Clifton said, is that it's easier to see what you're looking for than to see what's actually there. Norbert listened. He did not rush to fill the silence. I can't give you 11 years back, Clifton said. I know that. No, Norbert agreed. You can't. They sat with that for a moment. What I can do, Clifton said, I'd like to do, not as a gesture, if you'll let me. What Clifton Ware did in the months that followed was not spectacular by the standards of wealth. He did not hold a press conference. He did not post anything on social media. He used his position on the board of a workforce development nonprofit he had largely ignored for 3 years to push through a new initiative, a technical mentorship and IP support program, specifically for building service workers in New York City, structured around the model of the clinic that had helped Norbert with his patent. He brought in Gwen Ashford to lead the legal framework. He funded 3 years of operating costs out of his own foundation, not Ware Capital's, and he did it without attaching his name to the building where the program was housed. He did one other thing. Ware Capital Partners had 17 employees in building services across its 3 properties. Within a year of that diner meeting, 6 of them had been formally interviewed for positions in the firm's operational and technical support divisions. Not as a quota, not as a PR campaign, but because Clifton had issued a directive to HR that began with a sentence that his assistant would later say she had read 3 times before she understood what it was asking. Do not assume that the person cleaning the room does not understand what happens in it. 4 of the 6 were hired. 2 were in roles that hadn't existed before the interviews. Norbert did not return to Ware Capital after the acquisition. He did not need to, and he did not want to. He had a new set of problems to work on, which suited him fine, because working on problems was the thing he did best and had always done best, in the freight elevator, at the kitchen table, in the break room with the legal pad. He still lived in East New York. His father's number was still the first one in his phone. 6 months after the acquisition closed, Norbert was asked to speak at a small conference on urban infrastructure and innovation. About 200 people in a hotel ballroom in Midtown. He had never spoken publicly before. He stood at the podium for a moment, looking out at the room, and he said something that nobody in that room had been expecting, something that was not on any prepared remarks, because he had not written any. The system I built, he said, didn't come from a lab. It didn't come from a think tank or an incubator or a fellowship. It came from watching. 11 years of watching what was broken and understanding, from the inside, exactly why it was broken and exactly where the fix would have to go. He paused. The question I've been asked most since this became public is, how did you stay patient? How did you keep going when nobody knew? He looked out at the room. I didn't think of it as patience, he said. I thought of it as building. You build whether or not anyone is watching, because the thing you're building doesn't care whether anyone is watching. It either works or it doesn't. The room was quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something true has just been said out loud in a form. People weren't expecting to hear it. 3 weeks after the conference, a 23-year-old named Isaac, who had been working building maintenance at a hospital in the Bronx and had been developing, in his spare time, a sensor-based system for tracking supply waste in medical facilities, found the recording of Norbert's talk online. He watched it twice. Then he found the information for the IP support program that Clifton's foundation had quietly funded. He made the call the next morning. There is a version of this story where the ending is Norbert's number. There is a version where it is Clifton's changed behavior. There is a version where it ends with the program, with Isaac, with the idea that what happened here might multiply. All of those versions are true, but they are not the whole of it. The whole of it is something simpler and harder to say. It is this: Norbert Gaines was not waiting to be discovered. He was not hiding in a uniform, hoping someone with power would eventually see through it and recognize what was underneath. He knew exactly what he was. He knew what he had built. He had never needed anyone in that building to confirm it. And the proof of that is that he kept building regardless, in the evenings, at the kitchen table, under the lamp that needed a new bulb. The recognition, when it came, did not change what he was. It only changed what was possible. That is a very specific kind of strength. The kind that doesn't require an audience. The kind that does the arithmetic alone, in the freight elevator, on the way down, and decides quietly to keep going anyway. Who in your life is doing that arithmetic right now? Who is building something real in a room you've never thought to look in? And when did you last ask?